Good morning, everyone. This year marks 76 years since the liberation of the final Nazi concentration and death camps. It has been 82 years since the Nazi invasion of Poland sparked the formal beginning of the war, the beginning of mass slaughter of Jews across Europe. We are part of the last generation of students that will have the opportunity to learn directly from Holocaust survivors, something the pandemic has made even more challenging. It will be up to our generation to keep alive the memory of the more than 6 million murdered Jews, of the centuries-old communities that were lost, from shuls and yeshiva to the Yiddish theaters that were destroyed. It will be up to our generation to preach those lessons we have learned from survivors, to stand up to evil and heed the words, never again.
We begin today's assembly with a few quotes that are particularly meaningful. Primo Levi was an Italian Jewish chemist who survived Auschwitz. In one of his many writings after his survival, Levi wrote, "Monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men, the functionaries raised to believe and to act without asking questions." Primo Levi died by suicide in Italy in 1987. Yehuda Bauer was born in Prague in 1926. After the annexation of Czechoslovakia, his family fled to Palestine, where Bauer would eventually become a well-known Holocaust historian. He urges, "Thou shalt not be a victim, thou shalt not be a perpetrator, but, above all, thou shalt not be a bystander." Yehuda Bauer still lives in Israel and is 95.
Elie Wiesel was born in Sighet, Romania in 1928. Wiesel survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald, ultimately settling in New York after the war. He was a prolific writer, professor, and Nobel laureate. An important message of his was, wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race, religion, or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. Elie Wiesel passed away in 2016. These are three examples of people who survived Nazi Europe. Millions were murdered and
Something wrong with the video, the sound?
I think he froze. Okay, Chaim, do you want to take his part? These are three examples.
These are three examples of people who survived Nazi Europe. Millions were murdered and the world deprived of their potential contributions. This year, we are participating in a project called Our 6 Million, focused on the lives of victims. If you have one of the candles distributed at school on Tuesday, please type the name of the victim named on your candle in the chat now and light the candle if you have not yet done so.
Okay, I'd like to call upon Rabbi Horowitz now to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Lazar. Just in contemplation a little bit about, one of the main themes of Yom Hashoah, which is Yizkor, to remember. We say, remember, never forget. And even thinking about it coming off of Pesach, where we have a mitzvah to remember something from the past. There's a mitzvah every day to remember the Exodus from Egypt. But we balance that also with the idea of going free from Egypt. We're free from Egypt and we try to move on. We go to Matan Torah. There's freedom from, freedom to, balanced with the concept of zichira, of remembering. So I just want to try to contemplate for a moment on really in Judaism, what remembering really means, what the idea of Yizkor, and what for us, what Jewish memory is. So I'd actually like to read you a quote from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks Zatzal, who passed away this past year, when it comes to memory versus history. And I think we could bring that into the theme of today in terms of how we view the Holocaust, and how it's not just a historical event that happened to people, 70, 80 years ago, but that it is a part of our living memory. And Rabbi Sacks says as follows. He says there's a profound difference between history and memory. History is information. Memory, by contrast, is part of identity. I can study the history of other people, cultures, civilizations. They deepen my knowledge and broaden my horizons, but they do not make a claim on me. They're the past as part. Memory is the past as present, as it lives on in me. Without memory, there can be no identity. Rabbi Sacks is telling us that Yizkor, Zichira, Jewish memory, is a part of Jewish identity. And on some level, the Holocaust, the Shoah, is not just an event that happened, but it's a part of our identity as a people. And those who perished, the 6 million, they did not perish in vain. And they are a part of the Jewish identity, and those lives mattered. Today, when we remember them and we remember what happened, we are remembering a part of who we are. We're remembering a part of our national identity and the personal identities of those who passed. So as we look back and reflect and remember those who passed in the Holocaust, let us consider just how their lives are not just a part of our history, but their memories are a defining part of our identities. And to a degree, even though they're no longer physically with us, they literally do, in memory, live on within us as we incorporate our memories of them into who we are. So may their lives and memories continue to be a blessing, inspiration to all of us. And let's remember, but let's also be. And it's a part of how we move forward, is incorporating them into our identities for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Joseph.
We are honored to be joined today by Mrs. Rose Lipszyc. Mrs. Lipszyc was born Rosia Handelsman in 1929 in Lublin, Poland. Following the Nazi invasion, her family's house was confiscated and they were forced into a ghetto. The ghetto was later liquidated and her father sent to Majdanek. With her family on the way to Sobibor, Mrs. Lipszyc's mother took a risk that saved Rose's life. Following the war, Mrs. Lipszyc and her husband Jack lived in Israel before ultimately settling in Canada. Today, Mrs. Lipszyc is a proud mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She was recently featured in the award-winning documentary Cheating Hitler. It is our pleasure to be joined today by Mrs. Rose Lipszyc, who will be interviewed by Mr. Lazar.
Okay, thank you, Joseph, and welcome, Mrs. Lipszyc.
Thank you.
Let's begin by hearing a little bit about your life before the war.
Before the war.
Yeah.
I lived in Lublin. I was born in Lublin, and my whole family lived in Lublin. I don't know, Lublin was a city which contained 42,000 Jewish souls. And I think there's just a few hundred that actually survived. My father was a tailor and my mother was a housewife. I had two brothers, an older one and a younger one. My younger brother was the light of my life. He was 7 years younger, and I think that I never mourned anybody after I lost him as I mourned him. But they all went, they all died. I just want to tell you something about my father. When the war started, I got a scarlet fever. My father took the time every evening to sit with me because they put you to bed for 6 weeks. There was no penicillin in those years. And read to me Shalom Aleichem, the books that I remember the stories still today. Then I'll tell you about my mother. My mother was the kind of a woman that really was with the times. And right at the beginning of the war in 1939, one evening when we were still in our own apartment, they told us there is a group of people who were brought into the city of Lublin and thrown onto the market middle of the night in the cold of winter. My mother didn't think very much. She just walked down to that market and picked up a couple with a little girl and brought them home. And they stayed with us as long as we had the premises. That kind of a human being she was. We didn't stay very long. The ghetto was, I think at the beginning of 41 was the Lublin ghetto. I'm not positive sure about it. But that's the time they took our premises away and we had to leave. So we went to a village by the name of Osmolica, about 20 kilometers from the city of Lublin. And there, I just wanted to tell you that my maternal grandmother there were 8 children, only 2 survived. There were 14 grandchildren, only I survived. Now we'll continue then. Once we arrived at that village, my grandmother came from that village. She was born, and then when she got married, she moved to the city, and that's where the whole family of mine lived in the city. So my mother had some cousins that were living there, and she had a little house, maybe 2.5 rooms, but she had 2 children. So she allowed us to live in a shack behind her little house. But the winters in Poland are very severe. So we had to put sticks around the shack and dry leaves in between. And it was the earth. There was no floor there or anything like that. And a little stove. And that's where we lived. But the time that I lived in Osmolic from 1941 to 1942 were not so bad, because it was a small village and the Germans didn't really come there so much. They weren't really interested. The only way we made a living is by working in the fields. I don't know if you realize the feudalistic system in Poland. There were the very rich farmers and the very poor farmers, large landowners. So we used to work and pick sugar beets. Sugars don't necessarily came from cane. In Poland, they come from beets. So my mother and I, my little brother used to go. My father still stayed in Lublin to try to earn some money because we had to live on something. There's a moment I have to go back. In 1939, I think you're aware of it, that Russia came in from one side and Germany came in from the other side into Poland. Part of my family, my mother's brothers, and they ran away to the other side, hoping that at least under the Russian, it's not going to be so bad. So the only person that survived from that group, because they all came back, was the one that was sent to Siberia. She was caught. The Russians says, you really don't belong here. So they sent her to Siberia. And I remember when we got notice of it, my grandmother was holding my hand and saying, I'll never see my daughter again. Little did she know that her daughter is the one that's going to survive, but she won't. So we lived in that. I'm going back to the village. We lived there till 1942. In 1942, October, the high holidays, I remember listening to the people crying and begging God to let us live. But I guess nobody heard us. There was nobody heard us. And in 1944, in March of 1942, Lublin ghetto was liquidated and they all disappeared. And in October 42, they gave out an order that all the people from the surrounding area, from the small villages to small little towns surrounding the city of Lublin, had to congregate in Lipszyc, a small little town. So we went. My grandmother and my uncle still ran to Lublin because they had a small ghetto, which was called Majdanek Tatarski. So they still ran there. But we went straight to the Lipszyc. We slept one night in a front store, all 5 of us in one bed. The next morning came a knock on the door. Rouse. They took us out on a big marketplace. I know Poland is very famous for the marketplace because the farmers used to bring their goods and sell it Today, it's a little garden. They make it into a garden. I saw it when I went with the documentary to film. And there they divided. They took men and women without children to one side and women and children to the other side. They took my father away in a truck, but I don't know. I thought he died in Majdanek, but I'm not really sure where he perished. And my mother and my two brothers started walking the road to the train station. That was about, I don't know, 18, 20 kilometers. Nieczwica was the train station. And as we started walking, my mother started holding back and holding back. And she looked into it. You have to remember, I was 13 years old at the time. She looked at me and she said, I don't believe the whole world has gone mad. There's going to be somebody somewhere that's going to help you. I want you to understand that we're going to our death. She threw away anything I carried. She threw away the things she carried. There were 3,000 people walking that road and carrying those heavy bags. I never forget it. It's in my mind always, because they really thought they're going to be resettled. But my mother said, there is no way. If all those people in March disappeared from Lublin and we didn't hear anything about them, and they took the able bodies away, they're taking us to our death. And the only hope I have is in you, because if you live, I'll live through you. To tell you the truth, I was holding on to my mother's skirt very tightly, but she forcibly pushed me off the road. As I stood there for a minute, there were a few houses on top, and the last guard came over to me and asked me if I'm Jewish. I used to have blonde hair, blue eyes, and a very freckled face. Didn't look particularly Jewish. And I don't know, somebody yelled, don't you see she's a Polish girl? I was just couldn't say anything. I was so scared. And that was the last guard. To tell you the truth, that day I don't remember any very well. I ran through the fields. That's the last time I saw my mother and my brother. I ran through the fields toward dusk. I arrived at a Polish farmer. She must have told me to go to him. I don't remember. Why did I go there? Because I knew them. They're the only people I knew that they were kind people, and I used to play with their daughters. My grandmother knew his wife from the time when she was a young girl. I ran and I knocked on the door, and he opened the door for me and let me in. His name was Stanisław Jabłoński. I just honored him, but we can't do the ceremony because of COVID-19, but he is going to be honored as a righteous among nations. He let me in, and to my biggest surprise, my grandmother was there. She came to beg him to get papers from his daughters, birth certificate from his daughter, to my mother's youngest sister, to her youngest daughter, because she was still hiding in Lublin. And a Polish girl approached her and she said, you have blue eyes and you speak a perfect Polish. The only chance for you to survive is to go to Germany as a Polish laborer. You see, during the war, the Germans were all busy with the war, so the factories were empty. So they took forced labor from all the occupied countries in Europe, like from Belgium, France, Poland, Ukraine. So they used to take forced labor from Poland too. She says, as a Polish girl, if you can go to Germany, work as a Polish laborer, you have a chance. Here you don't. It's interesting that Germans didn't recognize a Jew that fast, but a Pole recognized a Jew a mile away. They just knew us, that's all. So she came begging him the same day when I ran away, the same day when she was looking for me, because my aunt wanted to take me with, she didn't want to go to Germany herself. I slept the night at that farmer's house. He gave me the birth certificates. But I remember a whole night I was looking through the attic, hoping maybe my mother ran away, but she never did. And he put me, the next morning, he took me to the train station to go to Lublin so I can meet up with my aunt, which, well, just imagine, I walk into the train station and all I hear, into the cab, and all I hear is they say, isn't that wonderful, we're getting rid of all the Jews. Here is a Polish man that helps me, and here is a group of Poles that can't wait to kill us all. They think the fear on my face would have given me away, but there stood an older lady and I recognized her. Her name was Antosha. She used to be a friend of my grandmother's. And she said, grabbed me by the shoulders, pushed me toward the window and said, be quiet, my child, be quiet. And that's the way I arrived to the city of Lublin, met up with my aunt, and the two of us volunteered to go to Germany. We bought crosses, and I became Helena Jablońska, and my aunt became Lodzia Jablońska. And the thing, not only did he give us the birth certificate and helped us, but during the war, through the years that I lived in Germany as a Polish laborer, he was writing letters to us like a father. So we had somebody that they couldn't tell me because they used to tease me all the time. I have curly hair like a Jewish little girl, but the letters helped us survive between, I lived with 80 girls in one house, 80 Polish girls. And all of a sudden, I had to make up a life that never existed and remember it the next day. They assigned us to work in a factory where we were making ropes. Am I going too slow? Have I got time limit, or can I just continue?
No, yeah. You're good. You can keep going.
I'm good.
Yeah, it's a good pace.
So I want you to understand they didn't treat the Poles very well either, because we had to wear a letter P when we walked outside. And at night we had to be 8 o'clock in. We weren't free. You had no way of knowing what's happening in the time. We couldn't listen to the radio, first of all, who knew German? We couldn't read a newspaper, and they didn't let us know anything. The only thing that we knew that something is happening is when the beautiful American planes were flying over us to bomb the cities of Germany. It's the only way we could know. And I have to tell you a little story. When I walked one day to the factory, my aunt Rose, Lodzia was her name, she was my sister, and 2 other Polish girls. And as we walked, a little German boy ran out, jumped out, and started screaming at me, a Polish pig. And I got insulted. And out of, I don't know what, I started screaming at him in Jewish, come on, I'm gonna break you all your teeth. Can you even imagine the look on my aunt's face? Because those Polish girls, I don't know, they didn't realize what I was doing. The fear, I think I started giggling like an idiot completely. But what's amazing about it, that the next day, I could not remember one Jewish word. The fear knocked the language out of me completely. The trauma, I don't know. I couldn't speak a word. As a matter of fact, after the war, I'll tell you the story, how they Jewish people wanted to throw me out because I couldn't speak Jewish. Completely forgot the language. So the biggest problem it was hunger. They didn't feed the Pole very well either. I worked in a factory. I was only 13. And I didn't see any meat or fowl or fish for 3 years. The hunger, I remember dreaming about a piece of bread and butter. And the fear of being recognized or being caught. My aunt and I used to talk to one another, just look at one another, and we knew what we meant. Or when we used to want to talk about something, we used to go out into a field where nobody could hear us. It's hard times. I was lucky sometimes because I was the youngest in the whole group of Poles. There were a few hundred Poles working there. And I was the youngest. So somehow I'm very skinny, and they kind of felt sorry for me, and they let me only work 8 hours, where all the other girls worked 12 hours. So, and it used to be a German Meister, his name was Herman. A few times he used to call me upstairs if he couldn't finish his sandwich and gave it to me. The rest, it was he kind of liked me. I don't know. I was lucky with this man. He was a nice guy. Not to everybody, but I happened to be lucky that he felt sorry for me and fed me. And maybe because some of those Polish girls were from farms, couldn't read or write, and they weren't as quick to learn. And I somehow learned those machines very quickly. So maybe that's why, I don't know. I don't remember how, but, and what can I tell you more? I don't know. I should continue.
Do you want to tell us about where you were when the war ended? And
yeah,
you know,
okay.
Yeah.
So we could hear the cannons, and we realized that something is happening. It's ending. They stopped feeding us. We stopped working. So we went to meet our liberators. A group of girls got together, Polish and us. Oh God. A group of us went to meet the liberators. And when we got to an abandoned camp, it was an abandoned camp because the minute the English came in, they took all the workers back to Belgium and to France. They drove them right back. So this place was empty. And can you imagine, we got into the kitchen. Oh my God, there was flour, sugar, bacon, and whatever else. And we started cooking and eating and cooking and eating. And my aunt got deadly sick. She almost died because our bodies weren't used to it. Then I stayed still with the Polish camp because you couldn't go anywhere, because there was no transportation in Germany. Germany was in ruins. But then a cousin of my mother, she survived the same way. She was corresponding with my aunt through the years. She came looking for us. So she took me to come to Salzheim, which was a Jewish DP camp. And that's when I went on the train and didn't realize it was full of people. I was going to drive to Frankfurt am Main from Bremen. That's a very long way in Germany. And when I walked in, I didn't realize it was an empty cab. I thought, I'm going to a cabinet. I'll go in there. Didn't realize that they were reserved for Jewish people coming from Poland that had a very bad time on the border. And they hated the Poles with a passion. And they all walked in. Well, I couldn't speak any Jewish, so they started talking to me. I couldn't answer them. So they said, oh my, Ashik says, do, out with it, throw it out. Well, I couldn't do that. I couldn't let them throw me out. The first time, after so many years, I met Jewish people and they were going to throw me out. So the head of the group said, listen, she's a young girl. I told him I'm Jewish. Leave her alone. Maybe she is. A whole night, some of the men were making me tell them about the Jewish holidays. Well, this I remembered. I could tell them all the Jewish holidays. But when I walked out in Frankfurt am Main, I heard one man say to the other, she must have been a maid in a Jewish home. They still didn't believe me. You see what happens? That between 13 and 16 are the years that you develop. I actually became a total Polish girl with their swearing and with their language and with everything. Swearing. Oh God, kids. I'm talking to young boys. Don't learn how to swear. It's very hard to get rid of it. I still swear. I can't help myself. It's a bad habit to learn when you're young. You know, I had 3 children in 5 years. So I thought if I was mad at anybody, I swore in Polish. I figured they won't understand. Well, I have one girl that's very good in languages, musical. She picked up every Jewish word. And she was singing once at a wedding, and she saw Polish waitresses. She said, oh, I know how to speak Polish. Can you imagine what language she came up with? She came home and she says, Mommy, what did you teach me? I says, oh my God, I never taught you that. So this I'm telling to young people, don't learn how to swear when you're young. It's very tough to get rid of it. Anyway.
Do you want to tell us about how
going
you came
to Israel?
be?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my aunt got married, and my aunt from Russia came back. And she said to me, you're my sister's daughter. Why don't you be my daughter and stay with me? They were going to go to the States. We had my grandfather's brother was living there. But I became a Zionist full-heartedly, with all my soul and heart. And I left my aunts and I went illegally to Israel. Kids, did anybody try ever to walk the Alps in the middle of the winter? I bet you not. Don't try it. I walked the Alps in the middle of the winter. And then I got to Italy. And in Italy, they put me into a new DP camp with young people. And you know what? That 1 year that I spent in Italy, I actually learned. You see, school finished when I was 10 years old. I didn't go to school anymore. So that's the year that they brought in some people. They taught me Hebrew. That's where I learned Hebrew. And that's where I learned a little math and a little history, because I had absolutely no education. What do you think? My English isn't bad. It's only because I'm such a big reader. That's how I learned the language. Anyway, in Israel, when I came to Israel, so then illegally we went from Italy to Israel, still illegally before the independence of Israel. And the same English that liberated me in 1945 incarcerated me in the beginning of 1948 and put me to Cyprus, where I spent behind barbed wires for 3 months, 4 months. And then I was let into Israel when the beginning of 1948 war started. I got married in Israel, but the climate did not agree with me. I got very sick. I was developing kidney stones, and my aunts had to try to get me. They couldn't get me to the States, so they got me to Canada. And I have to admit that I love this country from the day I came. They gave me a chance to grow and develop. I had my 3 children. My son was an accountant. My middle daughter is a professor. And my youngest daughter is a lawyer that works for the Children's Aid Society. My grandchildren, going to have 2 teachers, one doctor, 1 social worker. So they're doing all fine. And now I have great-grandchildren, 3 and 1 on the way. So this country has been very good to me. And I'm very grateful with all my heart and soul for them embracing me and let me live in freedom and in peace. And I'm trying, when I speak, I'm trying to bring my parents back to life, to tell them they existed. They were here, and they were good people, and they shouldn't have died like they did. So that's why I speak. I want you to know about it, but I want to remember them. I want to put them back to life. One student once told me that I bring him back. He could actually see my mother. Maybe I didn't tell you all my stories, but I try to do as much as I can.
Thank you. I think we'll allow a couple of minutes if students have questions. If you have a question, you can raise your virtual hand, and I'll call on you. If you prefer to just write it in the chat and have me read it out.
I like questions. Please, kids, ask.
I'll start while they think or write a question. Can you tell us when you started speaking?
Actually, when my husband passed away, I was driving to New York with my son, and I'm a talker. So sitting in the back seat, I started talking. And when we finished, when we got to New York, he says, "Oh, Mom, I never had such an enjoyable ride. You're such a good storyteller. Why don't you go and speak at the Holocaust Center?" And he encouraged me. That was about 16, 17 years ago. So I'm speaking since, maybe 15, I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
So it was my son's doing, actually.
So not even really that long ago.
No, because I had 3 children, and then I went to work. And I don't know, it never entered my mind. First of all, I didn't think I'm going to be able to talk to people. You know, some people, I never thought that I'm going to be able to talk. I once went to 600 kids were there, 600 boys in a private boys' school. It didn't bother me at all. But at one point, I didn't think I'll be able to speak to publicly. I didn't realize I could.
Yeah. Okay, I have a couple of questions from some students.
Yes,
one of them wants
please.
to hear a little bit more about the Cheating Hitler documentary.
Oh, well, it's only part of my life that they show there, but it's a very interesting, you saw it, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 3 people, and it's very well done. It was very interesting for me. I was approached if I go to Poland, and I agreed. And it was a very interesting trip because it gave me a chance to go to Sobibor and stand in front of the stones where my mother died, brought a stone home, and say Kaddish. That was it. And it was a very interesting, and I slept in the building that I was born in, and I ate dinner at where my father worked. Oh, it was very traumatic. And my grandmother says the best thing she liked, when we were celebrating my 90th birthday, and we were eating on the main street of Poland in a restaurant, and I looked up. She said, she listened on. I looked up and I says, "Mom, I made it."
So you've actually been reunited with the family that saved you, the Polish family.
That's 25 years ago. I went looking for them in Poland. I found one, but she somehow came, because I gave her money and I gave her some things. She sort of kept a secret, didn't tell anybody else. And then she died on me, and I lost contact again. And then when I went to Poland about 5 years ago with a group to Lublin, there was a Polish reporter that caught me and did a documentary in Polish. Can you imagine, after so many years? I still speak a good Polish, amazing. And she made a documentary in Polish, and it was viewed, it was on the radio. And some of the grandchildren heard it, the way that I was talking about the Jablonski, and they all got in touch with me. So one lives in New Jersey, a granddaughter. She called me up. She found my email through Israel. I don't know how she did it. And she called me. She came to visit. And there was the National Post came and made a little demo. Guess what? 4.2 million. Last time I looked on YouTube, 4.2 million people watched it. Can you believe it?
Yeah. Okay. A few more questions that came in. What did you do? What was your work in Canada?
Without my English, I managed to become a bookkeeper. I was very good with numbers all my life. So I took a course in bookkeeping and I worked accounts payable at the University of Toronto Press. And then I worked at Vibron, which is an engineering firm, and they're building soundproof things as a bookkeeper. Huh.
Interesting.
Yeah, without an education.
What aspect of Zionism appealed to you after the war?
First of all, identity, that we are a people already, right? That we should have our own roots and our own home. And that we should not be, never again, like the rabbi said, never again, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's what I say. That's what I taught my kids too. Never again.
Just another question here. So at what point did you really feel free, right? Did it really feel like you were actually?
Oh, there is no question about it. I was still as a Paul for the last, all you did, eat and dance and sing. That's all you did the first time when you weren't thinking about anything else. But I was still with Polish people. And I was still afraid to tell them I'm Jewish. You know, isn't that something? Although we were free already, because I lived for a few months until we could travel to the Jewish places, you see?
Okay, one quick one. Do you know the name? How can they find the YouTube video you mentioned? Do you know what it's called?
Oh, and it's a National Post and my name. Just type in my name.
Okay, I can send it out to everyone after also.
Yeah, it's just a small little tape. I mean,
Yeah.
5 minutes, but so many comments. I couldn't believe it.
Okay, I'm going to call on a student who's going to ask Mordechai if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi.
Oh, anybody wants to say something? Ask me more.
Yeah, here we go.
Hi, I'm Mordechai. I'm just wondering, like, how did you reconcile with the hardships of the war, and like, what perspective did you use to keep moving forward afterwards?
I don't know. I think my mother left me a legacy. She told me I should live in place of her, and I'm living. That's exactly what I'm doing, because in her memory, she first of all, she still believed in the human race. That's why I don't carry such a deep hate. Because if my mother, in the face of death, and she knew she was going to die, still believed in the human race by telling me, I don't believe the whole world is gone mad. Somebody somewhere is going to help you. And that's that positive attitude, that her belief in that makes me like I am. She did leave me a legacy.
Yeah. Okay.
Hate is a destroyer. Hate is a destroyer. It only destroys you. And I wasn't going to bring hate into my home, into my children. Okay. Anything else?
Okay. So I think that's it for questions. We can have a minute or two at the end also. I'm gonna call in Rabbi Horowitz, who's going to recite a Kel Male in memory of the victims of the Shoah.
Thank you.
Rabbi, just unmute yourself. There you go.
El Maleh Rachamim Shochin Bamromim Amsei Menucha Nechona Al Kenfei Shechina B'Malot Kedoshim Utorim Kizora Harakia Mazhirim Et Kol HaNeshamot Shel Sheshet Milyonei HaYehudim Chalelei HaShoah B'Europa Shenehargu Shenishchatu Shenisrafu V'Shenispu Al Kiddush Hashem בידי המרצחים הגרמנים, הנאציים ועוזריהם משאר העמים. לכן בעל הרחמים יסירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימים, ונאמר אמן.
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Horowitz. Ms. Lipszyc, thank you again for joining us, for sharing your story. I'm gonna give a minute or two in case anyone else has anything they want to say, or if anyone wants to just unmute themselves and say thank you, we can do that. I'll just maybe I'll read. Do you know how to open? Well, there's so many messages on the chat.
Yes.
So I'll just read. You can open it. You can see the chat at the bottom there.
Oh,
Some of them are writing thank you.
yeah, from John Diamond. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Avi,
Yeah,
Avi,
I see the thank you.
Avi, just unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Hi.
Yes.
When you heard what happened to like the rest of the world, because I'm assuming in your workplace you didn't get that much news, what was your first like reaction?
Well, you know what? When I walked with my mother and when they took her away, I knew she was telling me that they're going to end that, and I knew she was right. There was no hope anymore that anybody is living. The only people that came back is from my aunt from Russia. She's the only one, and my aunt that survived with me. We knew that everybody died. We knew. The way they were treating us, you knew.
Okay, so
was that the question?
Avi, did I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we have another one actually. Shimmy, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, come on.
I was wondering what your perception of legacy is for the people that have died, because, obviously a lot of people have been forgotten, but what do you have to say about the people that we can remember? Should we be remembering them? What should we be remembering about them? And I don't know, something along those lines.
I remember, interesting enough, I'm almost 92, and I happen to be lucky to have a good memory. And I remember a lot of things about my grandmother, my uncles. I remember every little detail, and once in a while I sit and think about them, or I tell the stories to my children, and my children tell the stories to their children. My grandchildren are very well, so it's by just talking about them, telling that they existed, that they were here. I made sure I did. I know some people couldn't talk for a long time, but somehow I could, and I tried. I always told my children are very much aware of everything. They even know that the family tree, they know everybody, especially one of my daughters. And my grandchildren are very aware of it. One of my granddaughters spent 4 years in Israel, so she is very much into it, you see. So they all aware of it. I think that by remembering and making sure it never happens again, not standing by and let it happen, that's the most important thing. I had 4 years of anger and an unbelievable anger when we had Trump in the head. So I don't know how anybody else feels about politics, but to me, he was a disaster. He was horror. He reminded me of Hitler again. I don't know why, but he did. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Okay, Yona, I think you can unmute yourself, and I think we'll have to wrap up so that that can be the last question.
All right. Hi, I'm Yona. I was just wondering, do you remember of any time that you may have felt like a grudge or hatred, like towards maybe not even a Nazi, but like towards a German after the Holocaust?
You see, the plain German people that I met during the war when I was in Germany living, but actually nice people. I used to come to clean in her place, and they were totally against Hitler, you see? So people are people, not everybody is horrible, you know? I think the scum of the earth became Nazis. But there were a lot of German people that were decent people, just didn't do anything about it. I don't know, I'm not very good at politics. I don't really understand it, how any human can become like an animal, but a lot of them did become like animals. Yes, there is a quiet hatred of them, there's no question about it. But I don't want to carry it. I don't want to feel it all the time because, like I said, hatred is an emotion you're better off to keep away from you because it only destroys you. It doesn't do anything to those people. They lived on and we didn't. So I wasn't going to give them another victim. I feel that if I grew up with such a hatred, I would be a victim too. And I wasn't going to give them, they had enough.
I want to thank you again for joining us this morning. Wish you good health. Ad Me'av Esrim. And I want to thank all of the students and the teachers and the Rebbeim who joined us as well. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. It was nice meeting you all, kids. Be well.
Thank you so much.
And look at the bright world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope this
Thank you.
coronavirus
Thank you very much.
disappears. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.